let's look at specific things you can put in place to help the children you teach who have visual stress. So we're talking scotopic sensitivity. We're talking what's also known as Erlen syndrome. We are not talking now about phonological dyslexia. Okay, so you know how this whole course we've looked at, does the child have visual stress or do they have phonological dyslexia? We're only dealing right now with visual stress. Now, the first thing to be aware of in your classroom is, wherever possible, avoid using white paper. Now, the priority is to have the words stop moving on the page so that the child can read them with less effort and with better accuracy. And so the easy change, the quick change, is to avoid using white paper, because white is going to be the colour that children with visual stress struggle the most with. And the brighter the white, it's harder it's going to be for the child to read those words. So wherever possible, use an off-white paper or even a coloured paper for children who you think have visual stress. If you're worried that the child will feel bad about being the only one using coloured paper, you can print the whole class. Set on that page of coloured paper. You know, who says that you have to give white paper and then give a couple of coloured paper sheets to the kids with visual stress? Why not just print them all on coloured paper? You can do that. Always print an assessment task or a test on an off-white or a blue or a purple page for the whole class. Because for assessments in particular, it's vital that your children with scotopic sensitivity or visual stress, Erlen syndrome, whatever you want to call it. But for assessment tasks, it's vital that those children are not disadvantaged by having to write on a white background and having to read from a white background. It's essential that you print tests on another page to maximise the chances that the children who have undiagnosed visual stress, the ones who don't even realise that they've got it, that way they can still succeed in the test and they can demonstrate their skills unhindered by the colour of the page. Something else to do in your classroom is to be aware that fluorescent lights and bright white light, which schools are filled with, make it really tricky for children with visual stress, because it makes it more likely that the words will be moving or fading or shaking, etc. So basically, the colour white, the very bright white light, or even worse, fluorescent lights, make the paper seem whiter than white. So to get around that, if you've got a child with visual stress, then you need to have that child sitting near a window so that the natural light from outside is compensating for the destructive impact of the fluorescent or the bright white lights. Another thing to do, really important, encourage the child to read through coloured overlays. Now, the younger the child is, the more likely they are to be okay about that. As they get a bit older, they get a bit more self-conscious. And also, as children get older, they've just become so used to finding it hard to read that they don't really consider that life could be easier and it could be worth changing. They just get stuck in their ways a bit. But many children thrive once they start to read through coloured overlays. Now, by that I just mean a piece of coloured plastic that's not white, that's a colour that helps your child. Now, the most common colours that seem to help kids are pale blue, pale purple, and dark purple. And the next most common colours, from what I can tell, are pale pink or a light grey. So it's not that every child will need one of those colours, but they're the most common, from what I can see, the most common colours that help kids. And they'll be quite helpful. And teachers often ask me, well, where am I going to get those coloured overlays from? Where am I going to get that coloured plastic from? Really, it's just a matter of going to your local stationery shop and buying some clear plastic folders that have that colour in the clear plastic. I know that at my shop nearby, I can buy 5 of them for, $2 or something. And then you just cut up those plastic folders so that you've got that colour as clear plastic and you've got your own overlay that way. And one folder will create, 4 overlays and something like that. So yeah, a quick trip to your stationery shop and you've already got a whole heap of coloured overlays. Something else to be aware of is that whiteboards are really tricky for children with scotopic sensitivity, visual stress, whatever you want to call it. So minimise your use of whiteboards. Now, I remember back when I was in primary school and I had blackboards, and the blackboards had their own problems of dusty chalk, etc. But children with scotopic sensitivity or visual stress, Erlen syndrome, whatever you want to call it, they would be much better off with blackboards than with whiteboards. Now, at school, we don't really have the option anymore of just using blackboards, which is tricky to get around, but you can get around it. And one way to do that is by having you write on butcher's paper that's on the board. And butcher's paper, whatever you call in your country, it's that giant paper that's low quality, basically. So it's not white, it's an off-white color. And what you can do is you can say to the class, look, I want to keep this sheet. The problem with, whiteboards is that once we rub it off, it's gone forever. I want to keep this sheet, so we're writing on this today. And that way, you're not making a big deal of doing it for a particular child. You're just it's just part of what you do in your classroom quite regularly. And that's a way of getting around whiteboards. Another challenge is with projectors and electronic whiteboards, because in a lot of school, the work is projected from a computer, and it's very straightforward to change the background of your PowerPoint presentation or your Word document that you're projecting from. Ideally, it should be standard in our schools, and I wish it was standard in our schools, that presentations were delivered on a pale blue background or a pale purple background, because then the children who wouldn't even realise they've got visual stress would have the best chance of reading from the board. Now, you can't change what other people do in other people's classrooms. You can change what you do in your classroom. So make sure that in your classroom, projectors or any sort of presentation, it's on a pale coloured background, and avoid using electronic whiteboards with a white background. Just try and change the background colour. Not too hard to do. Ask a computer technician if you're not sure how. Another thing to be aware of is that computer screens are usually turned up really brightly in schools. And the reason for that is the kids who don't have visual stress, they love having a bright computer screen. They love it. So they turn the screens up super bright. And what that does is it makes the white Word document or whatever your child's using, it makes that document even more bright, even more white. So if the words are moving on the page for them on white paper, well, they're going to move even more on the bright white computer screen. So you really want to train these kids who have visual stress to dim their screen. Don't dim it to the point where they can hardly see it, but dim it a fair bit, because they're going to do better on a dim screen than on a bright white screen. And there are even more effective ways. Like, you can change the background color of a computer screen very easily. Just ask your computer technician how, and they'll show you in no time. But for kids who feel a bit self-conscious, they're not going to want to go and change the background color of their screen, because then all the kids around them, suddenly they all want to do it too, and they're all asking questions. Oh, how do I do that? You want to avoid that. And the quickest, easiest way to avoid that is simply train the children who have visual stress to just dim their computer screen. Easy, straightforward, and not just at school, but train them to do it at home. Now, where it really matters as a teacher is that there are lethal combinations that you can have that just seriously mess up kids who have visual stress. Now, imagine this. Imagine that you've got a child who's given a worksheet on bright white paper, and that child is sitting directly under a fluorescent light. And then that child's trying to read from the whiteboard as well to do this sheet. Now you can see how almost every day in class, most children with visual stress are put in this sort of situation where you've got this terrible combination of bright white paper, terrible super white lighting, and then a whiteboard up the front. And it's really tough for them, and in some ways it's so unfair, because you've got these kids who just want to learn, but everything's against them, and it's causing them to feel demotivated. It's causing them to feel exhausted. They can't really give it their best, and then obviously their motivation goes downhill as well. So as a teacher, it's good to be deliberate about things like using white paper, sitting your kids beside the window to counteract the fluorescent lights. It's good to encourage them to use overlays, coloured overlays, and to be smart with how you use whiteboards, be smart with how you use projectors and electronic whiteboards, and to train your kids with computer screens. It's good to do that. But where it really becomes powerful is when you are recognising bad combinations happening and doing something about it, preventing it rather than dealing with it at the time. So good luck with that. It's well worth doing in your own classroom. The other thing I'd say to you that I'd really recommend is to actually suggest to parents, when you can see a child's got a problem, to really suggest to them not just all these changes that I've outlined here, but maybe your child would benefit from coloured glasses. If you work in a school in a fairly affluent area, yes, coloured glasses are expensive. Let's be real, they're not cheap, but they do make a world of difference, because when a child's wearing coloured glasses, who cares if they're reading from white paper? It doesn't look white through those coloured glasses. Who cares if you've got super white fluorescent light? It's counteracted by the glasses, and things like a whiteboard, no drama. A whiteboard through coloured glasses is not white anymore. So to just have the conversation with parents that, look, I've seen this work well for other children. Maybe you consider getting that for your own child, and that can be well worth doing as well. Well, those are the things that I would recommend you be very aware of for the children in your class who have visual stress, which is also known as scotopic sensitivity or Irlen syndrome. And don't just be aware of it for yourself. See if you can influence the culture of your whole school. But at bare minimum, make sure your classroom is somewhere where those kids can thrive and not be held back just by a lack of planning.